Friend and his mate decide to head out to Liechan for some hiking and general chilling. Raining like hell, but decide screw it, rain never hurt anyone. Get there about 2 or 3 in the afternoon, park, and set off down a trail. About 200 yards in, decide to go off trail and go exploring forest. Rain coming down harder, but they got raincoats on, so decide to keep on trucking. 45 to an hour in, start to hear movement following them, but just faintly because of the rain. They figure it might be another hiker or whatever passes for a ranger over there, so they just ignore it and keep going. Noises start getting closer. Sound as if whatever's making them is creeping up slowly. Few chills, but still chalking it up to another person. They eventually reach a less dense part of the forest and stop to chill and take a breather. The noises stop as well. Shrugging all around, more worried about the rain coming down than anything else. His mate says he has to go piss, walks a ways off. He's standing there, waiting for a good 8 minutes, but his friend walks up and stops a ways away from him. Figures he's just fucking with him, calls him over. Guy starts toward him, and he starts smelling like an old coppery smell, but he just chalks it up to his imagination. His mate finally makes it over and is just standing there, watching him. Asks if he's okay. The friend replies with a grunt. Figures he's just being silent for some reason, so he makes a suggestion of heading back. Friend nods in agreement, and they start back. Tries to make small talk on the hike. Friend only answers with 1 or 2 words, or he just grunts. Well, fuck you too, tickle. Pushes him. Friend kinda just falls over, all stiff-like, and looks at him. Usually when he would do that, he'd barely move his friend, and he'd always push him back. And starts thinking something weird is going on. Start hiking a bit faster, and his friend starts to fall back. Figures fuck it, he can find his own way out if he gets lost. Pretty soon, he loses sight of his mate and decides to hold up for a bit since he can't be that far behind. Waits for a minute, then 5, and then 10. Still no sign of his mate. Oh, that JPEG. Starts backtracking to the last place he saw him. Finds his footprints, but none leading away, forward, or to the sides. My friend starts shitting his pants just a little, but toughs it out because it's his mate and he's getting worried. Starts calling out his name, hoping for an answer, but doesn't get a response. Next level brown pants begins as he starts jogging back towards the clearing. Gets closer. Hears something booking it through the woods towards him. Stops and hides behind a tree to watch. Sees his mate buck ass naked run out of the path and look around scared as hell while calling my friend's name. Pokes head out, calls his mate, starts getting cursed out as he walks over. Asks why the actual fuck he's in his birthday suit in the middle of a goddamn rainstorm. His mate retorts, "Why the hell'd you knock me out and take my fucking clothes?" Staring at each other. Friend says he never did that. And if he did, why didn't he have his clothes? Get into a heated argument until they both start hearing movement nearby, along with that copper smell. Rustling nearby, both of them look in time to see his mate, fully clothed, walk out and simply look at the pair. The doppelmate then smiles, and something about it sets them off, and they take back towards the trail. Whole time they're running, they hear movement on either side of them. Have to take a few breathers in between running, because of fear and adrenaline can only carry you so far. The noises get closer, along with voices. Finally, make it back to the car. By this time it's dark out, so they flip on the lights as they're leaving. Lights catch a set of eyes a little higher off the ground than a human. Makes them both have brown pants moment as they drive off. Get back into the city, into their place. Friend starts looking over at his mate, notices scratch marks along his back, as well as bruising around his neck and shoulders. For a while afterwards, his mate would wake up at night screaming for him to cut this cursed thing out of my skin. Ends up having to take mental help over it. Freaks out every time a forest is mentioned around him.
Hello /X, I'm visiting from /K, and would like to tell you a story in regards to some of my recent adventures. There are no skeletons in closets, dinosaurs walking, or trips to Bel Air. I'm not a writer by any means either, so please forgive me if my writing style isn't the greatest. Whether this story is paranormal, extraterrestrial, interdimensional, or man-made, I'll leave it up to you, as I still cannot decide for myself. You see, I like to fancy myself as a survivalist, or a prepper for some of you. I live in Nevada, about an hour outside of Las Vegas. For certain reasons, I'm keeping my exact location secret, and purposely distorting some details. For those of you that don't know, a good 90% of Nevada is government or military-owned land. A lot of it is free to roam though. The only areas that you really shouldn't venture to are well-fenced and clearly marked. For good reasons, really. There are many still active radioactive sites, as well as government testing facilities, bombing ranges, and other things of that nature. They really aren't that exciting, to be quite honest, and usually only have some concrete foundations or target shacks on them, and are probably hazardous to your health or safety at that. The sites that aren't are usually fully manned military bases where they cock about with drones. Now, I've never been one to believe in paranormal phenomenon. At best, I acknowledge that our government has several high-tech projects they keep veiled, but what I experienced has really made me question these beliefs. I digress, however. Also, just a disclaimer, not all of these pictures are mine, because I didn't bring a camera with me. This story started about a month ago, around a warm spring night. Yes, it starts warming up early out here. When you were all getting snow, it was hitting about 80 degrees Fahrenheit during midday. I had vacation time I had yet to cash in on, and was nearing the point of expiration. So I took it, not really having any plans or foresight into what I wanted to do with my 2 weeks off. I did, however, take some of my savings and cashed out on an infrared laser for my rifle and the night vision monocular headset. The first night of my vacation, I felt somewhat restless, so I started up my Minecraft server and played around for a bit, still feeling unsatisfied. I have always had trouble sitting still, knowing there's nothing to be productive with. My mind goes racing, coming up with hundreds of project ideas. I finally settled on the idea of camping. Unfortunately, most of my friends were busy with the drudgery of work, and no one I knew was willing to go away for the week. It dawned on me that I had never tried camping for a lengthy period of time, alone. For good reason, though. The desert is a nasty place to get stranded, and death is a very real possibility should something go terribly wrong. Between dehydration, broken bones, and rattlesnakes, you definitely have to be careful. The only thing I could really think of to combat this would be to take my 5W ham radio and research the closest repeaters to different choice areas I have to call for help if things went south, and my Yugo M76 just in case. After doing some research and quick site planning, I settled on an area I honestly didn't know very well, but looked promising. It has several abandoned silver mines, washes for shelter, and generally good wildlife to watch or take potshots at. Of course, if anyone from PETA got wind of my ventures, they would have an absolute shitstorm over the number of jackrabbits and coyotes I've laid waste to. So once settling on my location, I began to pack. This wasn't difficult, as I always keep my bug-out bag ready in my closet, and decided it was a good time to cycle out old inventory. This time was a bit different though. I decided to bring a few more electronics with me than usual, including my ham radio, my night vision monocular, and a solar charger just in case. I decided to leave my cell phone behind and rely on a good old-fashioned map and compass for the navigation. From an early age in Boy Scouts, I've known how to navigate the old-fashioned way, and decided I'd give my rusty skill a bit of a test and see how well I remembered the UTM coordinate system. The electronics were for some nighttime fun and emergencies only. I woke up at 3:30 a.m., day 2 of my vacation. I was excited as hell and ready to head out. I decided to load up on crap before hitting the highway and stopped and got some coffee and donuts, looking like some ridiculous commando on a dirt bike. After getting my sweet black nectar and a load of simple carbs, I headed off. The weather was great, and the wind rushing over my face felt wonderful. As I got a few miles off at the turnoff, I remembered there was an Indian gas station fairly close to the exit as well. The Indian reservation boundaries are an odd shape, and for about a mile, the highway went right through the middle of it, offering anyone who stopped in some tax-free gasoline. I stopped in after topping off my tank, and the cashier asked where I was off to. I told her where I was going, and was just planning to go camping. She mentioned that the Air Force base a few miles away had been doing some testing, and warned me not to get lost under target range. This is definitely something to take seriously, as they do drop live ordnance. I thanked her for the advice, and headed out. It was early morning, and I continued to enjoy the feeling of wind on my face, and the liberating feeling of being able to break free from any social obligations. I reached the turnoff area, where it was all dirt and gravel from there on. I performed a quick test on my ham radio, set the repeater offset, and verified the reception was clear. The dial tone registered, and I got a familiar weather forecast for the day. I was ready to begin. I headed down the dirt trail and soldiered on through the bumps and washes. My bike frantically kicked up dust and rocks until I finally reached a couple fork points on the trail. At this point, I couldn't quite remember which direction I was supposed to go, as I had only been in the area once before with a friend, and he drove. I looked at my map and got what I believed was a good bearing, and headed off down the trail. Now, when I say trail, these are more like gravel roads that sometimes end, or bring you to a military base encampment, or some of the other small encampments around the state, or wildlife preserves, or even Bureau of Land Management land and campsites. Accidentally venturing to a military one isn't a huge deal. They usually just turn you around or wave you off, so I wasn't too horribly concerned about a run-in with anything, unless you're up near Groom Lake, but that's a different beast. After driving down this particular trail for a while, I realized I'm lost. None of the landscape looked familiar, and I had traveled a good 25 miles before reaching anything that looked like a decent campsite. I had plenty of water and food, so I wasn't concerned about finding a spring or anything edible. I had also remembered the way which I came, so that wasn't really an issue either. At this point, I just decided it was adventure time and drove on for a while until I found a campsite I decided was suitable for a short stay. I ended up settling at the base of a mountain near a dried up wash. It was a pretty nice area, and there were quite a few Joshua trees and trenches to set up in for some decent afternoon shade. It wasn't rainy season at this point, so the threat of a flash flood taking me out wasn't really of concern either. After getting set up, I threw on my camel pack, grabbed my rifle, and filled my flask with a bit of vodka just for fun. I was my own man now, and had to answer to no one. I walked around for a bit, heard the familiar sound of cicada, and headed towards another dry wash bed near the base of the mountain. After walking for a bit, I quickly became bored and took a swig of vodka. Sometimes, it can take a bit to just detach from normal life and relax. I decided after my drink, it was time to start setting up targets, and push my Yugo M76 to its limits. After setting up a few targets, I was ready to go. I walked back to my campsite, identifying local plant life, and inspecting oddly shaped rocks, not really in any hurry. I stirred up a jackrabbit on the way back, who was less than happy to see my presence in the valley. I shouldered my rifle to take a pot shot at it, and then noticed something in the corner of the scope. I adjusted the zoom and got a closer look, and it was a freshly killed coyote. So I decided to let our little rabbit friend go, and headed towards the coyote carcass. The closer I got, the more pungent the air became. The smell of rotting meat was heavy. When I got closer, two things struck me as odd. One, the pelt wasn't completely removed, but what had been was fairly clean. There weren't any missing extremities. Coyotes are considered a nuisance, so you can shoot them freely, but usually grabbing a pelt/tail/paw is common. Two, it didn't look like there had been an entry or exit wound from any bullet. Being a bit confused, I just wrote it off as a sloppy hunter that had found the coyote dead of natural causes, and was scamming some farmer offering bounties on hides. Sometimes cannibalism happens in coyote packs, but it's not very common. I made it back to camp, started myself a fire, drank down a shot or two more of liquid courage, and settled on taking pot shots at the targets I set up. I tinkered around, adjusted my scope, and tried taking the longest shots I could. I made a few accurate shots out to 700 meters, and decided I had pushed my rifle as I could in my slightly buzzed state. Yes, I know, guns plus alcohol equals bad, but I wasn't exactly in a crowded area either, nor completely shit-faced. After letting the rifle cool down for a bit and breaking open one of my MREs, I began cleaning it. After several failed attempts at keeping it 100% dust-free, I gave up and just did a quick field cleaning. It may not have passed the white glove test, but it would damn sure work if I needed it. After a nice 5-star MRE meal, I decided to break out my ham radio and turned it on, seeing if there were any other hams in my area. I scanned the stations and didn't really come across anything of interest, except for a few rangers reporting their status. I decided I'd do something you're really not supposed to do, and started scanning the capped channels. For those that don't know, the military operates on MARS capped channels, which have a very high frequency, higher than VHF, so please forgive the reference. You can eavesdrop on them with the right radio modifications. As long as you don't broadcast, you should be fine. I started scanning these channels and came across a bit of chatter. They didn't seem to have much to say either, except area status reports. After a bit, I started getting bored listening to them all report on 1000s, and turned off my radio. As dusk was turning into darkness, I sat for a while, just letting myself get into a trance, starting a fire. As I decided another drink was in order, I began to hear a bit of crackling coming from my bag. I grabbed my bag, assuming some critter Gila monster had decided to make itself a new home, and instead, found my radio turned on slightly. I turned it up a bit, and realized that the sound I was hearing were short bursts of what sounded like gunfire over the radio. Intrigued, I turned it up, and listened into whatever testing/war games were going on. As I listened in on the action, I heard what can only be described as fingernails on a chalkboard, coupled with a blood-curdling scream, and a bit of dying rabbit mixed in. As I reached for the knob to turn the volume down, I heard a pop, and then silence. My radio had gone out, or blown a capacitor, and I was now without any form of communication. I sat there in silence for a moment, wondering if coming out here wasn't the best idea. After thinking about it for a moment, and a bit of self-reassurance that I was just picking up chatter from 100 miles away, I decided that I was just letting small stupid things like the coyote carcass and the radio chatter get to me. For all I knew, it was just some war game being played and new equipment being tested. I decided it was time to get some sleep, and I'd do a bit more exploring in the morning. I took one more swig and crawled into my tent for a bit of sleep. As I awoke the next morning and crawled out of my tent, I felt like death. My back ached, and I was incredibly groggy and slow moving. I restarted the fire, filled up my mess kit pot with water, and started boiling it while pulling out some instant coffee. I decided that today I was going to do a bit of riding around and exploring. I looked back at my radio lying next to my tent and thought, I guess I better be careful. After a morning coffee and MRE eggs and bacon, I grabbed my rifle and headed out to see if I could see any signs of life or find any old abandoned equipment or buildings. I biked up a natural trail and came over a bridge to a large stretch of open valley and land. Off in the distance, I could see the beginning of a military base's fence. When I saw this, I felt an incredible sinking feeling in my chest. Whatever was going on last night may have very well been happening just a few miles off. I shook off the feeling and decided that I was just letting anxiety and my imagination get to me. I just told myself again that it was only war games and some noise was probably going through the channels. I decided to just avoid the area and rode back towards the campsite over the lower mountain ridge. As I turned back, I noticed something off in the distance, on the side of the mountain face. It was what looked like an abandoned silver mine or a natural cave of sorts. At this point, my curiosity got the better of me, and I shook off all fear I may have once had. Now I could actually do a bit of exploration. I rode up to the side, dismounted, grabbed my night vision and rifle, and peeked in. I couldn't tell how deep it was, but it seemed more man-made than anything. The rocks looked roughly carved, but I'm not a geologist either. I couldn't really smell or hear anything, so I decided to walk in a bit further. I put on my night vision and waited for my eyes to adjust from the bright desert sun to darkness. After a second, my eyes adjusted, and I turned on my monocular. There wasn't much to be seen. I walked for a ways, but still no signs of anything that would excite anyone other than a geologist. I could see what looked like a turn a little bit further back, and decided against going too far in. since I wasn't experienced in spelunking. That's when something hit me. There is a primal fear everyone has. People debate what it is, or how we acquired it as a species, but it's there. It's a deep feeling of dread, like you are being watched or stalked by something horrific. Chills crawl up your body, and you feel that something just isn't right. When I felt this, and immediately froze, rifle in hand, pointing down into the cave, I couldn't hear anything, nor could I see anything. I then, however, quickly realized what was wrong. The smell. It was the same pungent smell the coyote carcass was letting off. It seemed too rotten, too pungent, and too strong for just a coyote carcass. Even in the sun, it just seemed odd, but now I could smell it in the cave. This set off every alarm in my mind, and every ounce of fear told me to get the fuck out of there. I slowly backed out while shouldering my rifle, pointing it towards the back of the cave. Every rock under my boots sounded 100 times louder, and every breath I took felt like it echoed through the entire cave. As I reached the entrance, I just turned and bolted for my bike. I started up and rode back as quickly as possible. I was taking no chances now, and decided it was probably best to leave. Dusk started setting in as I was riding back, and I was contemplating just moving to a new site, or calling the trip off 2 days in. I still wasn't sure if any of this meant anything, or if I had just been overreacting, but I knew that some odd things had been happening. As I rode closer to my campsite, I noticed everything seemed off, as though nothing was how I left it. I was feeling really uneasy now, but wasn't about to leave my expensive equipment behind. As I got closer, I realized why everything seemed off. My campsite had been raided. My tent was torn, my mess kit was strewn about, the fire pit had been scattered, and my pack had been dumped out. I assessed the damage and realized something. Nothing was missing, just vandalized. Even my radio, solar charger, and extra ammo remained. Stuff I was sure would be missing. My decision was made. I was calling it quits. I started packing up my bag and whatever I could scavenge that hadn't been ripped up. This was about the time I noticed something else. There were no sounds at all. No cicada, no crickets, no birds. Just complete and deafening silence. As I was packing, I quickly drained my flask to calm my nerves. Nothing at this point could have changed my mind about leaving. It was quickly becoming dark, and even with night vision and a rifle, whatever was out there was obviously screwing with me now. It was obvious this territory belonged to someone or something else, and my hunting trip turned tables on me. As it got darker, I decided to scan the area first to make sure my surroundings were clear. As I looked around, I couldn't see much other than the familiar desert landscape, and as I began to scan the area near the peak of the mountain, I saw something move. It was just visible behind a rocky area. I tried to make out the shape, but it was distorted and hidden by some large rocks. I stared in that direction for what seemed like hours. Then, it stood up. To this day, I will not forget the sheer terror and fear I felt while looking at this thing. It's as though death and evil itself was staring right at me, and every part of my mind screamed, "This cannot be real." This bipedal creature stood as though it was human, but the eyes were massive. Just massive, blank, dark spots in my night vision. No reflection or gleam came from them. I couldn't distinguish any real features other than what seemed like a scaly texture. It just stood and looked in my direction, as though it knew I was watching it. Then, it did something that nearly made me piss myself. It smiled. It was not a normal smile. It was a terrible, jagged-toothed Joker grin smile. I took the safety off of my rifle and shined my infrared laser at it. After a brief pause, I delivered a fatal 8mm round to its head, or so I thought. The shriek that followed was deafening, blood curling, and absolute terrible to hear. It was a scream that went straight into your soul and shattered it to bits. The dying screams of someone getting their head sawn off with a rusty Taliban blade would have been more comforting at this point. I watched this thing shake and shudder for a moment, and quickly delivered another round in its direction. I think I hit center mass, but couldn't be sure. It ran, at a pace I'm not even sure my bike could keep up with, down the ridge. Not quite in my direction, but too close for comfort. I bolted down into the wash, and kept my gun trained in its direction best I could while running. I ducked into a small crevice and waited. I could hear grunts and screeches in the distance. At first, they seemed to move closer, and then farther away. It was difficult to tell where the noises were coming from, but in the pitch blackness, I sure wasn't going anywhere with that thing around. I stayed up all night, crouched in a crevice in the side of the wash, just waiting. Gun trained at the opening, and kept awake only by adrenaline. It was the most exhausting and terrifying night of my life. Dawn broke, and I hadn't heard any signs of the thing. It had been a good few hours since I took the first shot, but I waited until daylight was strong enough to even think about moving from my spot. As the sun rose, and the familiar sounds of wildlife returned, I felt safe enough to venture from my spot. Very carefully, I crept out, covered in dust and feeling incredibly drained. I emerged. I looked around to see if anything was around. There were no signs of whatever the hell was hunting me last night, so I decided to man up and head to my bike. I didn't even think to grab my equipment. I just slung my rifle over my shoulder and very reluctantly started the bike, fearing whatever came last night would hear me. After running it for about a minute and no signs of movement were seen, I decided to carefully start heading out. Before that, though, I had a thought. I wondered what may have been left behind where I scored the hit on that thing, and I decided to check it out, since everything seemed clear. I drove up the ridge in DEFCON 1, scanned the area just to make sure it wasn't watching or following me, and I got up to the rocky area where I first saw it hiding at. I found a nice bit of blood splatter. I quickly grabbed a handful of earth and dried blood, and then booked it the hell out of the area. As I was driving down the trail, I started feeling as though I was being watched again, but I only drove faster and didn't look back. After I got home, I had about $500 worth of gear, keeping only my rifle, a couple magazines worth of ammo, and my night vision goggles. I decided to get to the bottom of this. I called up a friend of mine who works for the local university and told her the situation. I didn't exactly go into detail, but I explained that I had been hunting and shot at something I wasn't sure of that had attacked me. She had me bring her the blood-stained rocks, and I guess she ran some DNA tests on them. She got back to me after about a month and basically told me, I don't know what the hell this DNA is, and explained to me that it only partially matched a few animals. But here's where things get really weird. I got a call from, well, I don't really know, to be honest. They referenced my camping and said it was best to just forget about it. I also noticed a few people telling me while driving and leapfrogging me on a regular basis, trading off following shifts. That's it, really. I'm not sure where else to go from here. I'm sorry I can't really bring much closure, but now you know just as much as I do.
This was a fan submission from Bean Machine 16. Hey, I love your channel. For context, I live in southern Oklahoma, near Lake Texoma. I live on 150 of woods and forest. One night, my dog ran out and I had to go find her. I was in the middle of thick forest when my phone died, so I didn't have a flashlight, and then I realized I was lost. I saw a dim light in the distance, and I realized it's from a telephone pole near my grandma's house, and we all live on the same land. I finally found my way to the main road, and was looking down the road I had seen my dog run into the trees. I chased after her until she was about 15 feet away from me, except she looked rough, like really rough. Her skin was showing, and she was bloody. Her back legs were misshapen. I brought her back to my house to find that it wasn't my dog. My dog was sitting on the front porch, and the dog I carried home disappeared. My stepdad loves to tell this one story every Halloween. B. Stepdad, 17, 1978. Grow up in rural Tennessee. One of his favorite things to do, hiking, hunting, fishing, real outdoorsman stuff. One day, he and a friend of his called Billy were fixing to do a weekend-long camping trip in some woods, just a few miles from their homes. They left their bikes by the opening to a trail and just hauled their equipment in by themselves. They set up camp after a while, finding a nearby river to possibly fish from. As they set up camp together to start a fire, Billy asked my stepdad to have a listen around. Apparently, for the last few hours, there hadn't been any kind of noise, not even insects, but my stepdad chalks it up to their presence. Stepdad and Billy spent Friday night alone in the woods, eating food cooked over a fire, shooting the shit, usual stuff teenagers in the 70s would do. Around 1 a.m., my stepdad is in the tent they set up earlier in the day when he hears for what he for sure knows is a person. He keeps intently listening to wonder what this person is doing, but he still tries to act like he's asleep in case it's some serial killer or backwoods weirdo. Stepdad hears, "Hey, Danny," in a very concerned tone, almost scared even. Stepdad has no clue who the fuck Danny even is. "Danny!" This voice apparently cries out in desperation again. Strange guy who's looking for Danny fucks off after a few seconds or so. Stepdad tries to sleep, but struggles thinking someone might be lost or dead. Next morning comes, and he talks Billy into seeing if they could try and look for the stranger and his friend Danny. Billy agrees, and they head off into the woods. Billy tells stepdad that he's still yet to hear any animal noises, which my stepdad shrugs off. As they continue trekking through the woods looking for lost strangers, stepdad asks Billy not to split up, as that's dangerously stupid, but cover more ground by distancing themselves. Billy agrees to this, and they separate by 10 feet. He keeps sight of Billy, and they frequently call out to each other to make sure they're still within reach. Stepdad keeps walking alone in the woodland, looking for any signs of people having been there recently. He's keeping track of footprints or signs of anyone. He calls out to Billy, but doesn't hear back immediately. He sits still for what he guessed was like 10 to 15 minutes, calling out for Billy. "Billy! Billy!" He stops when he hears someone else calling Billy's name. The other voice calling out Billy's name scares him, and he looks around his surroundings. Then he sees someone sitting up in a tree. "Billy! Billy!" This person, as he describes, had somehow been up there this entire time and had no idea how he hadn't spotted him. This person is some shade of deathly pale, wearing almost nothing, covered in lesions, open bloody sores, and what looks like pus dripping from open scab-like markings. Stepdad nervously backs away before the strange guy just drops and lands perfectly on the ground and flashes him this very wide and unnatural smile. "Billy! Billy!" He describes this creepy guy's voice as what it sounded like if the Wizard of Oz had taken a can opener to his vocal cords. Creepy guy catches up with stepdad. Somehow, he never fully figured how he managed to be face to face with him so quickly. The creepy guy then proceeds to cut my stepdad's face into his hands with that smile still on his face. "Back off, you friend," stepdad yells at him before running away. Stepdad collides into Billy soon after and tells him what happened. They see creepy guy just standing there with his smile, and they run for it. Somehow creepy guy is keeping up with them. Stepdad decides to do the brightest thing imaginable and jump into the river. After jumping in, they relax and let the current take them away from creepy guy. Creepy guy is still running parallel to them and cackling. Eventually, they lose sight of the creepy guy. Stepdad and Billy just let the current take them for a while swimming back to the riverbank. By then, it's almost dusk. They reach a small campground area, climb out of the river, and ask one for the campers for a ride back home. Apparently, the distance they travel by river, there are 2 towns over from where they started. Stepdad never sees creepy guy again, but still goes outdoors. He keeps a shotgun from then on. Kind of long, but here's one story I have. Last year, mid-January, Minnesota, so it's cold as fuck and icy. Driving back from Thief River Falls to Red Lake with the GF and her cousin at night. Kinda squished together since my truck is a single cab. Must have been minus 10 degrees with a wind chill of minus 30. Then a fucking snowstorm happens. Strong wind, heavy snow, icy road. This part of the highway sees barely any traffic. Used to this kind of weather, so it's really no biggie. Just chugging along when we see this dude walking. Denim jacket, blue jeans, and black cowboy boots. Stop the truck. GF and her cousin are telling me to just keep going. Their excuse is no room. They were right, but it's too fucking cold to be walking. Make cousin sit on GF's lap. Dude gets in. Middle-aged, long hair, fellow heya like us. Says his name is Abraham, but people call him Ahab. Start to talking. Says he's going to Red Lake as well. Pretty cool, chill guy. He starts telling us stories of his youth, fishing and hunting. Funny stories, really. After about 20 miles or so, we near Red Lake, maybe about 5 minutes out. Ask him exactly whereabouts in Red Lake he lives. Silence. GF yells in a panicky tone, "Where the fuck is he?" Look over, and he's fucking gone. For some reason, I slam on the brakes and kind of slide on the shoulder. We are fucking freaking out. He was just right there, sitting and talking. The fucking dude just vanished. Later on, we drove back home and talked about it. Since us American Indians are the superstitious type, we just presumed it was a spirit. Later talked to GF's grandma about this. She says that happens often. Apparently this dude Abraham died in a rollover in the 70s. People pick him up and he vanishes before he gets to Red Lake. I've posted this before, so here it goes again. Just moved out of my old apartment. There was a guy that lived behind me and our patios faced each other. He was a total bro and would hang out and have cookouts all the time. He also had a dog that was pretty chill. He would let the dog out at 9 p.m. every night and would bark random from 9 p.m. to 9:30 p.m. every night. One day, I didn't hear from him at all, so I decided to check on him. I tried peeking into his patio door and I saw no furniture or anything in the house, like he just moved out suddenly. I didn't see a moving van the day before. I asked the people in the office where he went. They said he ended his lease early with no explanation and told them he was moving out early in the morning. That night, I heard shuffling outside and looked out my window. In my ex-neighbor's patio, I saw the silhouette of a dog standing on its hind legs, not bracing or anything with its front legs. It was 9 p.m. The dog started making this weird, moaning, barking noise, almost like it was being strangled. It did this until 9:30. When I checked again, there was nothing on the patio. This happens every single night at the same time. It was the only reason I moved out.